Today's session is titled Urban Vegetation, Schools, Students, and Neighborhoods, an Outlook from Chile. And we have a wonderful group of colleagues from Chile, led by Esteban Villalobos Araya. And Esteban will introduce his colleagues, because I'm not sure I will pronounce the names correctly, and I don't want to do any mistakes. So Esteban and his colleagues will present for 18-20 minutes, and after that, we'll break out for small group discussions with questions that the team shared with us. And after that, we'll come back for a large group discussion. So Esteban and colleagues, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Oren. Thank you for inviting us. I'm very excited to show today our work. This is an interdisciplinary team of colleagues, part of it is our Ignacio Fernandez. He's a professor at the Center for Monitoring and Modeling of Ecosystems. There's also Rodrigo Perez Silva, who is a professor at the Center for Applied Economics and Social Policy. And there's also Isabel Matas, who is a professor of architecture, three of them at Universidad Mayor. And she's also a doctorate student of the public policy doctorate program. And myself, my name is Esteban Villalobos, as Oren already presented me. I'm a free agent at the moment. I will say I do different things. I work with the recently created group of cities, territory, ecology, economy, and sustainability. And we called ourselves cities. It's a very ad hoc name, and it works well for the kind of things that we're doing. And I also work for the convention, for the Constitutional Convention in Chile, and I'm in charge of the Environment and Nature Special Report. Having that said, today we're going to present what is more a research agenda. Let me see here. And as such, we're going to present some preliminary work in some level, some of our theoretical ideas are more propositions that we're testing and seeing how they work. And we also already have two papers that are in R&R, and part of the results that we're going to present today are part of that, of those two papers. Can everybody see my screen? Yes. Yes. All right.
You might want to present it, move to presentation mode.
Yes, I was just, I wanted to be sure that we were on the same page. Give me 1 second. All right. So what you can see here is a picture of Santiago. This is a beautiful picture of Santiago. Santiago is a highly polluted city during the winter. We are in an intermediate depression. So I would say that this was a lucky day probably from the summer. And it's a picture that is taken from the west part of the city. As you can see, our presentation as is very descriptive at this point, as we are connecting dots and points of our different agendas. And basically what we're trying to do here is to connect three different, tapping into three different SDGs. We have SDG 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities. We have SDG 4, which is Quality of Education. Specifically in both of them, we're tapping into two specific SDGs, 11.7, which is provide universal access to safe, inclusive, and accessible green and public spaces. On 4.7, we're trying to tap into ensure that all learners acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development, including, among others, through education for sustainable development and sustainable lifestyles. So part of what we're going to show today are definitely into these two SDGs. And we're also including SDG 15, which is more about what we will discuss today as ecosystem services. to have sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, sustainable managed forests, combat desertification, and halt and reverse land degradation and halt biodiversity loss. Where we're trying to, what we can, at the baseline, we can see in our presentation today is that using schools as part of, or potentially as part of ecosystem services, we can try to combat desertification from the local level. Let me see. So what we observe as a group is that we have opportunities and questions. One of the opportunities that we observe with the SDGs and with the Sustainable Development Goals agenda in general is that we need to create and we need to achieve a higher integration of different fields and different systems. The complications of that is that many of our countries are still in the process of that integration, or many of them are definitely not in that process either. So when we try to work towards an integrative agenda as the one that we're working on, we need to provide evidence that work for more than one field. So we can actually have impact in more than one field, and at the same time start creating this more hybridization of evidence. Among the questions that drive our work are, can schools help improve and reduce inequalities of access to green spaces? And if so, do schools with better green spaces support healthier and happier students' school experiences? And if green areas and the student experience of the environment are so important these days, as we can see in many of the discussions that happen in this workshop, why not including them in the student experience beyond the curriculum? The curriculum is one part of what we can do, but at the same time, including metrics and indicators related to the student experience of the spaces that can lead to a higher awareness of the environment are also potentially part of what we can try to achieve with our research and analysis. And what we anticipate from the Chilean side of the evidence and what we can see from Chile is that school green spaces are already part of many schools, and we can talk about different variations of this. We understand that some areas, for example, are more just certified areas. You know, there's a desert, so you cannot just go and say, "Oh, I'm going to green up all the space," but at the same time, you can do something to actually work with the environment. And that's basically the direction that we're trying to follow here, even though we're talking about green spaces specifically. And what we see is that already part of many schools that doesn't follow a policy orientation in many cases and in many countries, and or an approach beyond architectural plans, which is the case of Chile. It's part of the architectural plans of all public schools, but at the same time, there is no regulation that actually enforces or assure a specific quality of green spaces. So Santiago is a highly segregated city. The basic draw that you can that you normally see, especially when we talk about socioeconomic status, is that the eastern part of the city is more affluent, and the western part of the city is less affluent. And in the case of Santiago, that interweaves with different inequalities in terms of ecosystem services. One, surface temperature. This data is at the municipal level. So we can see here is that surface temperature is higher on the western part of the city. Vegetation cover is lower in the western part of the city and higher in the more affluent part of the city, which is the east. And with air pollution is something similar. We see that the negative effects or the worst pollution is on the west, and the best air quality is on the east with the more affluent communities. So the question of how can we use great infrastructure as schools to help to provide better access to green spaces and probably impact into air pollution and such, is linked to this situation here. So urban vegetation plays a fundamental role in urban quality of living through the provision of ecosystem services, as I mentioned already. For example, temperature regulation. What we can see here is that areas of the city that have more vegetation have almost 5 degrees less summer temperature in the summer. So heat islands and phenomena of that kind can be ameliorated probably with the right vegetation. Examples of this are all over the world, and we can see something similar, for example, in Sevilla, Spain, that they started a program to reduce the temperature of the city through installing trees all over the city. So how do green spaces impact people? There are aspects that are more that tap directly into what happened to students, for example, such as physiological and psychological restoration. It has also been argued that it can lower depression, stress, and anxiety. Just because of being exposed to them, you can ameliorate those feelings and experiences. It can lower social conflictivity. It can improve the thermal comfort, lower acoustic and air pollution. It can improve higher physical activity. If you have better spaces to do it and you're exposed to better spaces to do it, you will probably have higher physical activity, even if it's just to play a game or to walk. And it improves also sense of belonging. So we're talking about 6 different aspects that are highly connected with the idea of having a more sustainable approach for schools and educational systems that can be related to greening our schools. So one first look at how school types in Chile are connected with vegetation. So Chile has basically has three different type of school types. We have public schools, we have subsidized, there is a typo there. Subsidized or charter schools, depending on how do you name them, well, basically are the same, and private schools. And then we have a vegetation cover here. So what you can see is that basically private schools, as in the previous maps, are located mostly in the more affluent part of the city, which is also associated with a higher vegetation cover. Whereas public and subsidized schools on the west have less vegetation cover, and they're more concentrated in this western part of the city. So going back to our research agenda and how are we going to, what are we going to talk today? We have that from one side, we have unequal access to vegetation inside and outside of schools, as we saw previously on the maps. So we asked ourselves, do they ameliorate or reproduce vegetation access inequalities? More definitely on the line of how many effectiveness studies do with school practices. In this case, we ask a similar question to schools and the access to vegetation. At the same time, then we say, okay, we consider vegetation, socioemotional development, and learning impacts on Santiago students. We attempt to validate an impact model of vegetation and socioemotional indicators of Santiago. At the same time, we are moving forward to analyze complementary and green areas, comparing socioemotional impacts. There's a literature that basically tried to understand the differences and what is more effective in terms of physiological and psychological restoration, either built up spaces or more natural environments. to do that, we used the following data. We got 4,311 classes from Santiago schools. So basically, we had access to all schools in Santiago and all classes in Santiago, specifically from 4th, 6th, and 9th grade from primary education and 2nd grade of high school. And our unit of observation is the school. Specifically, the number of classes that we have per grade are here. Then we have math and reading test scores from the National Monitoring and Evaluation System, which is CIMSE. And interestingly, the CIMSE provides also socioemotional indicators, which is what we use to test the potential impact on socioemotional data. In this case, we have self-esteem and motivation indicators, school coexistence, or what is also known as school climate. We prefer to go for coexistence because climate can be tricky in the sense that we are talking about ecosystem services, and we don't want to provide any mistaken understanding on that. And we have also healthy lifestyle habits and civic participation. This 4 areas are indices, so they're not as standardized as the math and reading test scores, but as indices, they are continuous variables that we can apply any type of regression over them. We have also context indicators coming from CIMSE, which is the municipality where the school is located, the socioeconomic status of the school, and the students, the type of school, as I said, public, charter, or private school, and we have others as well. And one of the novelties that we introduced in this analysis is that we used school vegetation as percentage of the school area per students, a ratio, and the school vegetation in the school surroundings. So there's evidence tapping into the importance of the greenery or vegetation on the school surroundings and the impacts on healthier lifestyles or health indicators. But in our case, we were able to describe and separate those indicators to see, well, is it that the school provide the service, or is it that the area where they're located, the one that provide the services? To do that, we use geospatial methods. Basically, we did a spectral classification of vegetation based on Sentinel satellite images. So basically, we use satellite images and we describe and create polygons according to the type of vegetation that we saw at schools. And we divided it between trees, deciduous, evergreen, and grass. There's also just dirt, let's say. And we did calculation of the percentage of vegetation cover in schools and external buffers, as I said previously, with distances around the school border of 50, 200, 500, and 1,000 meters. So we get to cover to what is normally assumed as the neighborhood level. What we did was a linear regression model to estimate the effect of the percentage of green areas by student over socioemotional indicators, as I already said. We also tested achievement information, outcomes coming from reading and math test scores. First, we calculate the aggregated effect, including all classes, and then by degree. So some descriptive statistics. Excuse me, Oren, how much time do I have?
2 more minutes.
2 more minutes.
So
all right.
Try to give us the main gist of the finding.
Yes. So basically, in terms of descriptive statistics, what we see here is that, as we saw on the maps, private schools have more vegetation inside and outside of schools. Public schools have a little higher percentage than charter schools. We ask if schools replicate urban inequalities, and yes, they do. They don't provide or ameliorate inequalities of access to vegetation, and usually replicate what happens in their surroundings, no matter if they're public or charter schools. By socioeconomic groups, they're also connected to the socioeconomic status of the groups. And then finally, to test our socioemotional, the impacts on socioemotional indices and their dimensions. As I said, we covered academic self-esteem and motivation, school coexistence, civic participation, and healthy lifestyle habits. What effects have green areas over socioemotional indicators? What we see is that it impacts motivation and self-esteem for all when we use all grades. We also see that there's a almost consistent impact on school coexistence, high impact here. Not on healthy lifestyles. We anticipate that school curricula doesn't tap into this aspect, even though it could. And I think this would be an interesting aspect to discuss afterwards with the audience. And with civic participation, what we see is that there is an important impact that happens, that tends to happen on higher grades, basically on 8th grade in primary school and on 2nd grade of high school, potentially because of higher usage of the space and a higher empowerment over the use of the school as a whole. So conclusions, as I said, schools replicate urban inequalities. Every percentage point at school surroundings is associated with an increment of 0.4 percentage points inside of the school. And the effect is more prominent in schools with fewer resources and public institutions as well. Green areas play a fundamental role in increasing self-esteem and motivation among students. It can also affect civic engagement and civic participation. So there is a potentiality there for vegetation. At the same time, we see that the same variation creates an average increment of 4.5 points in school coexistence. This is much higher for older classes, in which the effect is almost 8 points, 2nd grade of high school and 4th year of primary. And we see that because of the impacts on school coexistence and because of the impacts on healthy lifestyle and the lack of impacts on healthy lifestyle habits, a higher involvement and better work can be done from the government level and from the state level, in the case of Chile, to introduce a more active curriculum that allows students to live and experience their green areas at school, and at the same time improve and sustain through higher and sustained sense of belonging through higher school climate. That's it. Thank you so much. And questions?
Thank you so much, Esteban. So maybe we can stop sharing the screen for a second.
Yes.
And we might want to go to the slides in a minute. I saw already a question from Lin Zhu. I saw it on the chat. Lin, would you like to ask your question?
Let me see. Would you like to introduce some roadmap or framework to improve green space quality? Methodologies or plans to reduce air pollution, cooling or decline the temperature or urban areas from carbon capture, or to recommend some paper focus on local levels such as Santiago City, although these issues are, yes. Coincidentally, Ignacio is one of the lead researchers on this area and this field here in Chile. So he can definitely provide some of his work related to ecosystem services. We are currently working on a framework that should be published that basically positions schools and gray infrastructure on sustainability and at the same time on ecosystem services, which is something that is lacking on the literature right now, and we see a need for it. And specifically, that framework will tap and will be based on South-South evidence and from the Latin American perspective. So if you leave your email here, we can share with you, and we can share with all of you. No problem. Thank you, Gavin.
Ignacio, would you like to say something about this?
Okay, yes, and in fact, we have been working a few papers right now. Both of them are in review process, and probably one of them is going to be accepted, hopefully in the next week or few days. And I have also some papers regarding regulation services in cities, mostly here in Santiago. And in fact, one of the things that we have been discovering is that it's not all vegetation the one that have the impact. Is some specific type of vegetation. For example, grass is not very good for reducing temperature, neither reducing pollution. But evergreen trees mostly are very effective. In fact, are more effective than, for example, deciduous trees that here in Chile, or at least in Santiago, most of the native vegetation comes from evergreen trees, and deciduous trees are mostly represented by exotic trees. So the good thing here is that we can use native vegetation in order to reduce temperature and also to reduce pollution. And the other thing that we have been discovering, and Esteban didn't refer to, is that, well, at least we have been kind of transforming a little bit the research that we have been doing in the results that we have been having. And the thing is that evergreen trees are the one that has the most impact also in students. So we think that we can use native vegetation, that is the one that has the conditions for being here in Chile, because we have a kind of semi-arid climate, so you can be irrigating the vegetation in the schools. In fact, most of the public and subsidized schools, they don't have much money in order to maintain the vegetation. So we can have some good recommendations for using native vegetation, the one that use less resources, and kind of doing some tackling two problems. The one related with quality education, increasing the quality of the schools, increasing the scores of the students, the socio-emotional kind of scores also, and at the same time to increase the quality of the environmental quality of the city, and at the same time also to conserve biodiversity. So I think that we are going to have very interesting results on that paper that Esteban referred recently.
Great, thank you so much. Mark, I see a question from you.
Yes, thank you. This is amazing presentation. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I hope you can hear me okay. I'm on my phone. But I actually had two questions, I guess. The first, my own experience trying to foster something similar in the Princeton public school area. The most pushback I've gotten is because I have to justify how it meets standards. I know you had said that your urban, the vegetation had been kind of an underutilized resource, the green spaces. Is that part of maybe a similar experience where there's not a direct emphasis on standards right now? I mean, I can always find ways of connecting my work to standards, but is that kind of the same sort of academic pressure in Chile? Was the first part of my question. The second part was along with the vegetation, have there been any, especially with the native plants, have there been any opportunities to look into possibly like smaller wildlife, like animals, like insects or other, amphibians, other little animals that might live in these areas as a way of also capturing students' imagination and attention.
Esteban, we can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, may I start answering? Then Ignacio will dive deeper into it. So there is very little, so there are scattered experiences. I will start from the last question and then go to the first one. There's scattered evidence and experiences related to bring students to learn more about what they find and what is there in their environment, recognize their environment. But there is no true attempt to do that as part of the curriculum. This is very important because the Ministry of Education started to introduce a whole change in the curricula related to the SDGs and to improve sustainable education or to actually foster sustainable education. But with the pandemic, with the different chaos that have been happening in the country, that has been lagging behind, I would say. But there are different initiatives in different parts of the country that try to do what you were asking for, but at the same time, is not mainstream at all. And
appuie sur un bouton, vous êtes comme hypnotisé.
Lauren, there you go. And sorry, and your first question was about standards. So there's some narrative about standards here in Chile, basically related to public spaces. What happened with the green spaces in schools is that they basically are treated as a public space, especially for public schools, for example. But as such, they fall behind the regulation. So in the end, who is in charge and why do we have X amount of green or vegetation in schools? It's a matter of the capacities of the school and the sensibility of the school and the municipality that basically runs and is in charge of local education, local public education. So if they don't pay attention to it and it's actually just burdensome because they need to invest money on it because of maintenance, etc., then they don't do it. So standards, yes, they're even part of some of public documentation that supposedly should lead where should we go, but they're not impacting local education at all, my opinion.
Right. I was thinking, I mean, looking just even where I am right now, I mean, a lot of the green area is sports fields or, recreational in terms of like playgrounds or something, but very little is appreciated as like a living laboratory where students could actually gather data and gain an awareness of their environment.
Yeah, and just like a complement of what has been commented by Esteban is that at least I don't know any standards of schools. In fact, in Chile, we don't have really standards for vegetation at the city level. There are some recommendations. They are very new, like from 2015, but they are not mandatory. They're just recommendation that you have to have, for example, a green area of, 1 hectare near your home, like at 300 meters, something like that. It's something that you are not going to find in almost anywhere in Santiago and in other cities. And at the school level, I don't know any kind of recommendation, at least. Esteban could comment on that much better than me. But the things that I know is that most of the students or professors that like to, or teachers that want to give some knowledge of nature to the students, they have to take the students out of the schools. So they go to some green areas near the schools, or they can go very far from the schools, because in the schools, normally they don't have very good green areas, or even they don't have any green areas. We have several schools that they have zero meter of green areas within the schools. They are completely built, paved. So I think that is something that it's not in the education, it's not in the paradigm of the education here in Chile. Vegetation is not something that the schools want. It's something that only the richest schools can have, because it's more than an investment. I think that it's considered like a cost. So most of the vegetation, we find vegetation here in the private schools, the richest schools, and a few public schools. It's something that it's very, it's not good at all.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Any other questions before we move to the next part of small group discussion? Anyone? So I guess I'll have the opportunity to ask a question. That's great. So I'm just trying to understand how the team is working together, because it seems like this is an interdisciplinary project that brings the education, the satellite imaging. It sounds like a gigantic project. Can you tell us a little bit about how you set it up?
Ignacio, would you like to go for it, or do I go for it?
You can tell the story.
Okay. Okay. So it's how to say, it's a combination of good luck and at the same time good faith, and basically people bringing stuff to the table and saying, oh, we're all thinking about the same stuff. And so from one side, Ignacio and Rodrigo, they were already working with a combination of environmental indicators to basically describe the other range of inequalities that you can see in Chile. Chile has large literature related to educational inequalities, but there was very scarce literature and evidence related to environmental inequalities, and especially thinking about the SDGs. We were not having much evidence, and there was no theoretical development associated with it, etc. So that's one thing, and they were already started working with it. And Ignacio, from the ecosystem services level, he was already testing out the environment, let's say air quality, pollution, winds, fauna, etc. And he's already, and he keeps doing that. Simultaneously, so Rodrigo was also interested on a high quality measure of this phenomena. And then I jumped in. They were looking for a research assistant, and I ended up not as a research assistant, but we ended up discussing, okay, where are we going, and what are we doing? I moved towards for the past 4 years educational infrastructure, and specifically the two major dimensions, social interactions and learning, and basically trying to understand how students experience the space and how that experience should be part of the metrics that basically penetrate the policy level. Otherwise, our quality metrics will always be administrative and will never tap into the student experience. So, in that amalgamation of stuff, we said, okay, what do we have so far? And we started aligning our planets and see, okay, so we can do this kind of analysis. I was already with the idea of doing socioemotional, of analyzing and research socioemotional indicators with infrastructure. Ignacio was looking at ecosystem services, and we had Rodrigo that was already very good at conducting research and producing quality evidence. And he's also a geographer. And Isabel jumped later on from the architectural realm, also challenging my propositions that were more architectural and planning oriented. I'm an urban planner by training too. So that's a whole set of people. And we also have another doctorate student. She works on health and urban health metrics. So we're not many people. We're 5 so far, but I think we have a very good combination of interdisciplinary knowledge to move this kind of agenda.
Wow, this is really, as other people said already, this is a very impressive project on how many different levels it touches. So congratulations, this is wonderful. Let's move to small group discussions. Okay, thank you so much, everybody, for coming back and for staying with us. We had, I don't know about your group, but we had an amazing discussion on the multiple layers of this project, and I can't wait to hear from other groups. So maybe one of the groups want to share a couple of highlights. Who is going to share from one of the rooms? Ignacio, do you want to start from our group?
Okay, I can start. Okay, so we were talking about we talked about a lot of things, but I think that the most important thing that we talk is that in general, schools are not seen as a part of the city. This is kind of you have the school system that is completely separate from the cities. So one of the things that we were talking is like that the schools must be planned as to be an essential part of the city in order to provide services not only to the students that are attending the schools, but also like to the community, and not only the community that surrounds the schools, but also the community that is beyond, like for the entire city. And in fact, Oden was talking about, and he sent a few links there that I'm very eager to look later, and that schools can provide several ecosystem services for the entire city. For example, you can take some climate change actions based on what you can do in the schools. If you generate several, if you have enough vegetation, you can of course store carbon. You can reduce temperature, you can reduce pollution, you can also increase the awareness of students and the entire community about climate change and the things that you can do at the school level, and that specific things you can replicate in the entire city. For example, Oren was talking about that this kind of islands of sustainability that the schools can become, and this is a very interesting kind of a paradigm that you can have a specific infrastructure within the city that can kind of be self-sustainable, and you can provide your own energy, and they can be separated for the other problems that the city can have. So you can create very resilient schools, and at the same time you can use, in my opinion, that specific interventions in order to educate the whole community to take actions at their own level. And I think that is a very, very, very interesting point of view to understand the schools not as a separate item, but as part of the city. As I talked about the example of highways. When urban planners plan highways, they understand that highways are going to connect different parts of the city. So the schools have to be planned the same way. You have to understand that the schools are going to connect different communities, that the schools are going to provide also ecosystem services, not for the community, but also for the entire city. And you can have biodiversity, you can use schools for conserving biodiversity, for educating, for recreation, for, I don't know, all the things that you can imagine that schools can do.
Okay, thank you so much. I will just add that in one of the themes in our discussion was how the social aspect interact with the intervention. So people mentioned that you can plant trees, but then the community, some people in the community might steal the trees and plant them in their backyard. Or you can put a community garden, but then people won't take care of it or abuse it. So there is a lot of attention. We need to pay more attention to how the social aspect interact with an intervention like vegetation, greenery, schools, etc. Ignacio asked us a very good question. What happened to schools over the weekends? And in many places, schools are closed. There are gates, they are gated, so people can't even use that resource over the weekend. And that's something we need to rethink or reconsider. So thank you, Ignacio, and everybody in my team. That was a fascinating small group discussion. The second group.
Mulin, do you want to speak? Because we have a high school student here, and I think your perspective is very, very interesting.
Yeah, we did. Thank you. Yeah, we had some really, really fun discussions, and one of the things I really want to share is what we ended with. Is about how we had our discussion towards the end. We focused on young people today, like me, and we talk about how right now with the advancement of the at-home technology, such as things like these, how people are young people are more and more reluctant to go out, and I have been constantly immersed in forests because I've been working for a conservation institution for a while, and I kept telling my friends that being in nature will help with your will help with whatever you are doing. Just taking one day off per week, going in nature will immensely just kind of take all the stress off yourself with that forest bathing experience. And but now I think one of the biggest challenges, especially regarding the younger generation, is that we want to get these people to enjoy nature like we as human beings used to. We used to be really involved in forests, but now we talked about how national parks has been getting less and less visitors, and one of the main reasons might be the rise of technology, smartphones, laptops, and all sort of social media platforms. So sometimes, in somewhere for example, my town, Princeton, New Jersey, I think we have this decent pretty large vegetation cover, but but only a small proportion of people actually cares about going out and interact with nature. So we think like I said, some of the biggest challenges that we think going forward is to actually bring people back to essentially back in time so that we can enjoy nature like they used to. Overall, yeah, the discussion was really interesting.
If I can add to what Mulin was talking about, he's one of my students, one of the rock stars of our research program. But we had the cicada emergence in Princeton, which was an enormous event, and again, this is a world famous emergence in Princeton, and Mulin and I and a few other students worked as hard as we could to get people to appreciate it. But most people saw it as a nuisance. And I mean, I was like, these are the cicadas that sang for Bob Dylan in Day of the Locust back in 1970. And that actually worked a little bit, but trying to get more people into appreciating the natural world instead of seeing it as a hindrance or as a benefit instead of just a nuisance is really has been a challenge, even in a what you would think is a fairly enlightened community here in Princeton. But we still have work to do everywhere.
Thank you so much, Mark, and the student Mulin and Neha for joining us today. It's really a pleasure to hear your voices here. Others? We have one more group that I would love to hear from.
my group, but I don't want to take over
Don't
because I was already presenting. So
don't worry. We have Gareth, we have Janelle.
I was in group 2. I was in group 2 and it was highly informative. I just so appreciate the way Esteban delivered a response on environmental spaces. And of course, my interest in every discussion is school facilities. So I asked him, relevant to the social, emotional learning and environmental space, how did he feel that the school facility actually impacted those dynamics? And he, quickly came back and says, anybody ever seen the schools? And then instantly in the chat books, there was a picture of, schools in Chile. And my question came because he was all encompassing in his presentation and discussing ideas. He brought in architecture and he brought in the environment, like the students could look outside the window. So that triggered my thought, what about the school facilities? And I just really appreciate the way he operates and the way he answers questions. I also asked him about how the information was being archived and documented. Because was it recorded? Because the information that was presented today is something that people in the future would be able to look back and see how the ideas were actually formulated. I really appreciated the way this student, graduate PhD student, is formulating ideas, because it's definitely pointing our mindset globally and around the dynamics of student engagement, the environment, the facility, and the social emotional aspects of it. Excellent discussion.
Thank you, Janelle. And I'm very happy to see you here. Gareth, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, we were lucky enough to be in the group with Mark as well, who's doing that school project with Moulin, and it sounded amazing. And I was really struck by it. Just started, I think, from noticing just some turtles in the local environment that were just in that local environment. Everyone was ignoring them, and then so Mark and his students built this, sort of brought them into a learning environment. And I was really struck by just using what's there. And Esteban made the point when we were talking about the built environment, everything's made of bricks, of just being able to look out a window and look at a tree, something as simple as that can do a lot. And I think another thing that we spoke about, which I thought was quite interesting, was how it's hard to get this stuff into curriculums that are really busy. As Neha said in the chat, schools' priorities have changed, and we need to help kids pass exams, etc. And I think one challenge, so we're talking about how linking greenery to academic achievement might be a way of getting policymakers to introduce it more. But then one of the challenges with that is sort of identifying the causal link. So I think Esteban made a really interesting point about how the literature shows that it's hard to link greening to academic progress directly, because greenery is linked more to well-being factors, which then lead to academic achievement improvement. So that's, there's obviously challenges with trying to follow that chain and convince policymakers to make changes. Yeah, it was really, really interesting.
Great.
Yeah, I'm sorry, if I just add, I really enjoyed what Esteban was saying, because we really need, thankfully schools are finally realizing the importance of social emotional well-being. So really the argument to make is that greenery improves social emotional well-being, which then will have a positive impact on economic performance, or academic performance. But really it is that social emotional link, which I hope schools will continue to take note. There's a big push now in New Jersey schools to really look out for the social emotional well-being of a child, and I really hope that continues, because it's so crucial to maintain that energy for that improvement in the school environment.
Yeah, it just remind me of a meeting I had with our administrators at the college, and I was trying to convince them to invest in some green walls within the campus so people can see some greenery as they go in the building. And the administrator looked at me and said, green walls? People are going to walk into it. He said, no, you do it in a way that people won't walk into it, and it will be good for mental health. So people are looking at me like I'm strange, but here at the group, I'm hearing that this actually might have some evidence that it's working. So I'm really happy about that. So I'm going to let them read some of the papers from Esteban, Ignacio, and the group before they say no. Sorry for that, I had to share. Any other questions or comments? I would love to hear from Isabel because we haven't heard from you yet, and I know you're on the project, bringing a very unique perspective from architecture. So if you want to take a moment and share with us a couple of comments, that would be great. No. That's fine. Anyone else?
One thing that I think that all the systems around the world need to rethink, it's this about academic achievement. No, we talk a little bit in our groups about measurement of happiness, no, and how we need to measure a lot of things always. And this academic achievement is also measurement, you know? And when you look at the people around our human history who really create huge change for us, they were not precisely the best students. They didn't have the higher grades at school, no? They were kind of average on that, but they were pursuing their dreams and they were feeling that's the one thing that they wanted to do. And I'm sorry that the system really pushed a lot of the teachers to really do this thing, academic achievement, and focus. I mean, the tests are important, yes, of course, but they don't meet the measure to define the things, yeah. And also the actual world has been demanding us for years right now to connect with nature more and more, the ones who live in the city, no? Why is not happening? I guess all of us, the adults here, when we were at school, at elementary, it was part of the conversation at the higher levels, yeah? But we're still here talking about that things and it's not happening. Why is that? No, and well, these conversations are really good. And thank you for Los Chilenos. You guys are gorgeous, really. The things that you're doing is really very good.
I agree. So thank you, Jeanette, so much. We are running out of time. Is there any final questions or comment? I think we are good. So we will see you again in December. We are having a guest speaker, Nancy Kendall from Madison, Wisconsin, going to share some work that they've been doing in Africa. I hope to see everybody there. Have a good day. See you next time.